Clara Whitfield did not cry at her brother's funeral. She stood at the edge of that frozen ground, with her fists locked at her sides and her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached, and she let every soul in Hale's crossing stare. Let them whisper. Let them pity her. She wasn't going to give a single one of them the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. Ethan was gone, and she was alone. If you've ever been told you weren't worth saving, stay until the very end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The day Jonathan Hale rode back into Hale's Crossing, 3 things happened. A horse threw a shoe on the South Road. Old Reverend Marsh choked on his breakfast and called it a bad omen. And Clara Whitfield, who had been quietly starving for 6 months inside the house her stepmother was slowly stripping bare, looked up from the wash basin and felt something cold move through her chest that had nothing to do with the January wind. She knew that horse. She'd know that black coat and that iron straight back anywhere. She turned away from the window before he could see her looking. "He's back," Emily said from the doorway, breathless, the way 20-year-old girls get breathless over men who have no business being looked at that way. "Clara, did you see? Jonathan Hale is back." "I saw. Do you think he'll come here?" Clara picked up the washboard and went back to work. "No." "But he and Ethan were—" "Ethan is dead, Emily." Her voice came out flat, not cruel, just flat. The way things get when you've said a hard truth so many times, it stops hurting to say it. "Jonathan Hale has no reason to come here." She was wrong. He came before the noon bell. She heard the knock at the front door, 3 sharp raps, not uncertain, not polite. The kind of knock a man throws when he's already decided he's coming in regardless. Margaret's voice floated down the hall, high and sweet, the way it always got around men with money. Then footsteps. Then a silence that made Clara's hands go still over the basin. She didn't move. She wasn't going to be the one who ran to the door. But Margaret's voice cut through the wall like a blade. "Clara, come to the parlor. Now." She dried her hands on her apron. She didn't hurry. Jonathan Hale was standing by the cold fireplace when she walked in. He hadn't taken off his coat. His hat was in his hands. He looked exactly the way she remembered, like a man who had learned very early that the world would try to knock him down and had simply decided not to let it. Hard jaw, harder eyes. But something in those eyes shifted when he looked at her, just barely, just for a second. She didn't let herself think about what that meant. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Hale?" She folded her hands in front of her. "I didn't expect to see you." "I imagine not." Margaret stepped between them with that bright, sharp smile she wore like a weapon. "Mr. Hale was just telling me he's come to pay his respects. Isn't that kind? After all this time." "Ethan's been in the ground 6 months," Clara said. The smile flickered. "Clara—" "It's all right," Jonathan said quietly. He wasn't looking at Margaret. He was looking at Clara. "She's right. I should have come sooner." "Why didn't you?" The question came out before she could stop it. Not angry, not even accusing. Just honest. And she watched something move through his expression. Guilt. She recognized it. She'd worn enough of it herself. Before he steadied. "That's part of what I came to talk to you about," he said. "If you'll give me a few minutes." "I have wash to finish." "Clara," Margaret's voice dropped to that low warning register. "Mr. Hale has ridden a long way." "I'm aware." Clara looked at him. She made herself look at him straight, the way Ethan always told her to. Eyes up, shoulders back, like you got every right to stand exactly where you're standing. "5 minutes, Mr. Hale. I'll give you 5 minutes." Margaret opened her mouth. Jonathan looked at her stepmother with an expression so politely immovable, that Margaret closed it again. "Thank you," he said, and he looked back at Clara. "Alone, if you don't mind." They stood in the front room with the door cracked. For propriety, Clara told herself, not because she was the least bit nervous. And Jonathan Hale turned his hat over in his hands, once, twice, like a man working up to something he'd rehearsed, and didn't trust anymore, now that he was standing here saying it. "Your brother saved my life," he said. "I know." "I don't think you know the whole of it." She waited. He looked up. "Brandywine Creek. 2 winters back. We'd made camp and there was a raid. I won't put the details on you. What you need to know is that Ethan pulled me out of a burning supply wagon when he didn't have to. He didn't have to, Clara." His jaw tightened. "He got me clear, and then he went back in for 2 other men. He saved all 3 of us, and he didn't say a word about it after. Acted like it was nothing." Clara's throat tightened. Yes, that was Ethan. "He made me promise something," Jonathan said. "After. When we were sitting by the river, and I was still shaking, and he was acting like we'd just come back from a church picnic." A short breath, not quite a laugh. "He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd look after you." The tightening in her throat moved down into her chest. "I don't need looking after." "I know you don't. Then why are you here?" He set his hat on the side table, deliberate, like a man putting down something heavy. "Because I've been writing for 3 days trying to figure out how to say this, and I've got no good way to say it, so I'm just going to say it." He looked at her. "I know what's happening in this house, Miss Whitfield. I know your father left the property tangled, and I know your stepmother's been selling off what she can, and I know you've been doing work that 3 servants ought to be doing, because there are no servants left to do it." Her chin came up. She felt it happen, that old reflex, pride moving before she could stop it. "That's my family's business." "It is, and I wouldn't touch it except—" He stopped, steadied. "Except Ethan's dying wish was for you to be all right. And you're not all right. And that means it's mine to deal with." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe your brother everything." The words landed in the room and sat there, heavy and simple and honest. And Clara felt the back of her eyes begin to sting, and absolutely refused to let it go any further than that. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Hale?" He didn't flinch. "I'm proposing marriage, Miss Whitfield." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the wind pushing at the window glass. "I beg your pardon?" "I know how that sounds." "Do you?" Her voice was quiet, very quiet. The kind of quiet that Ethan used to say meant she was deciding whether to say something she'd regret. "Do you have any idea how that sounds? You ride in here after 6 months. You tell me Ethan asked you to look after me, and your solution is marriage? I understand if I'm not a charity case, Mr. Hale." "I'm not offering charity." "Then what are you offering?" He held her gaze, didn't shift, didn't look away. "Protection, stability, my name, the security that Ethan wanted you to have." A beat. "And I'm offering it because I choose to, not because anyone forced my hand." Clara stared at him. She thought about the letter from the bank that Margaret had intercepted last week, that Clara had read over her shoulder before Margaret knew she was there. She thought about the wool coat she hadn't been able to buy this winter. She thought about Emily, sweet and useless Emily, who would do whatever Margaret told her because she didn't know any better. She thought about 6 months of eating pride for breakfast and calling it a meal. She thought about Ethan. Then she straightened her spine. "No," she said. Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly. Something more complicated. "Clara, Miss Whitfield." He absorbed that. Miss Whitfield, I'm not asking you to. I know what you're not asking. And I'm telling you, no. She picked up her apron from the chair where she draped it when Margaret called her in. I appreciate you honoring Ethan's wishes. I do. But I'm not going to marry a man out of obligation, and I'm not going to be someone's debt settled. That's not a life. That's a transaction. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. All right, he said finally. She blinked. She'd expected argument. All right? You said no. I heard you. He picked his hat back up. I'll leave you to your mourning, Miss Whitfield. He walked toward the door. Something in her chest did a thing she didn't have a name for. That's it, she said. You ride 3 days, and you accept no that fast? He stopped at the door, turned halfway. I didn't say I accepted it, he said. I said I heard you. And then he was gone. Margaret descended on her the moment his horse cleared the gate. What did you say to him? The composure was gone, that brittle prettiness stripped right off, and what was underneath was sharp and cold and entirely unsurprised by its own ugliness. Clara Whitfield, what did you tell that man? The truth. You said no. Margaret's voice pitched up. To Jonathan Hale. Do you have any idea? Do you have the first idea what that man is worth? What a connection like that could mean for this family. For this family, Clara repeated. For all of us. Emily is fine. Emily needs a future, and so do you, whether you're too proud to admit it or not. Margaret grabbed her arm. Not rough. Margaret was never rough where it left marks. Just firm. Just insistent. You listen to me. That man came here for a reason, and you are going to get it back. You are going to send him a letter. I'm not sending him anything. Or so help me, Clara, I will put you out of this house before spring. Her voice dropped. Soft now. Vicious the way soft things get. Your father left me management of this property until Emily's 25th year. You know that. I can do it. I will do it. Clara looked at the hand on her arm. She looked up at Margaret. Let go of me, she said. A beat. Margaret let go. Clara walked back to the wash basin. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in the room that used to be half Ethan's and was now entirely hers, and entirely empty. And she stared at the dark ceiling, and she did the thing she never let herself do in daylight. She thought about how bad it actually was. The bank letter. 3 months behind on a loan she hadn't known existed until Margaret ran out of people to borrow from. The firewood running low. The pantry running lower. Emily, who was kind and useless in the way of girls raised to be decorative, who needed someone to think for her and had no one left to do it. She thought about Jonathan Hale's voice. I made that decision long before your brother ever asked. She sat up. She hadn't been meant to hear that. He'd said it too low, half to himself, when Margaret had left the room for a moment, and Clara had been reaching for her apron. She hadn't been meant to hear it. She thought about it for a long time. He came back the next morning. She was at the well when she heard the hoofbeats. She didn't look up from the rope. He dismounted, didn't say anything, just stood there at a distance that was respectful and somehow still entirely present, the way he seemed to fill a space just by occupying it. I told you no, she said. You did. I haven't changed my mind. I know. She looked up. Then why are you here? He was holding something, a folded piece of paper. He set it on the edge of the well. That's a copy of a deed, he said, to 40 acres of timberland about 2 hours east of here. It's in your name. It was in your name the moment I signed it over at the county office this morning. Clara stared at the paper. I can't accept it's already done. He met her eyes. It's yours. No strings, no obligation. You can sell it, farm it, leave it to sit, whatever you choose. It has nothing to do with my proposal. Then what is it? It's what Ethan would have wanted. His voice was steady. Steady the way things are when they've been thought through all the way to the bottom. It's yours, because you deserve to have something that belongs to you. Not your stepmother, not a bank. You. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt so he wouldn't see it. You can't just give people land, Mr. Hale. I just did. That's not... She stopped. Started again. Why? He was quiet for a moment, just looking at her the way people don't often look at her, like she was someone worth the full weight of looking at. Because the first time I ever laid eyes on you, he said, you were 17 years old, and you were standing in the middle of Hales Crossing's Market Square, and some fool was trying to shortchange your brother on a horse trade. And Ethan was getting mad and loud, the way Ethan got. A ghost of something passed over his face, and you stepped in between them, quiet as you please, and you laid out that man's price discrepancy to the penny, and you looked him dead in the eye and said, I believe you miscounted, sir. A pause, and the man backed down. Clara remembered that day. She hadn't known he was watching. I was 17, she said. I was protecting Ethan's money. You were protecting your brother, Jonathan said, same as he protected everyone else. He picked up his hat from where he'd rested it on the saddle. You don't owe me anything, Miss Whitfield. My proposal stands, but that deed stands regardless. He put the hat on. Good day. She picked up the paper after he'd gone. She held it for a long time. Then she went inside and sat down at the writing table. And she wrote a letter. He came when the letter reached him, which was the following afternoon, which meant he hadn't gone far, which meant... She stopped thinking about what it meant. He knocked 3 times. She answered herself before Margaret could get there. Come in, she said. He came in. She gestured to the chair across the writing table. He sat. She sat. The deed was on the table between them. I have conditions, she said. Something in his expression, that steady, unreadable surface, shifted. Not much, just enough. I'm listening. I will not be managed. I will not be decorative. I will not be told what rooms I can and cannot enter in a house I live in. She held his gaze. I will run my own affairs. I will have a say in any decisions that concern me directly. And I will not be... She stopped. Said it anyway. I will not be a replacement for something you lost or a debt you're paying. If you need that, find someone else. Silence. And if you decide in 6 months that you made a mistake, she continued, I need to know that I have something to leave with, that I won't be where I am now. She touched the edge of the deed. This helps, but I need your word. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and looked at her from across that table with those dark, level eyes that gave nothing away and somehow gave everything. You have it, he said. I have what? My word. And more than my word, I'll have it written up legal and proper before we stand in front of any reverend. Everything you just said. He paused. I'm not looking for something to manage. I'm not looking to display you. And I'm not paying a debt. He held her gaze. I'm asking to build something. With you. If you'll let me. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Ethan. About the way Ethan used to say, Clara, you trust too careful and give too little. And one of these days, that's going to cost you something you can't get back. She thought about the letter from the bank. She thought about the way Jonathan Hale had said, "I made that decision long before your brother ever asked." 1 year, she said. We try for 1 year. If it doesn't work, we figure out what comes next, he finished. Together. She looked at his outstretched hand. She thought about everything it cost to take it. Then she reached across the table, and she shook it. His grip was firm, warm. He didn't let go any faster than he had to. "All right, Mr. Hale," she said. "Jonathan," he said. She looked up. "If we're doing this," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been the very early, very cautious beginning of almost something. "You may as well call me by my name." She pulled her hand back, set it in her lap. "All right," she said. "Jonathan." He stood. She stood. He picked up his hat. "I'll have the papers drawn up by end of week," he said. "You'll want to read them yourself before you sign." "I will." "Good." He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Miss Whitfield." He turned back, just halfway, just enough. "For what it's worth, Ethan talked about you a great deal. Every time." Something crossed his face, something real and brief and carefully controlled. "He was very proud of you." She held very still. She didn't trust her voice, so she didn't use it. He nodded once, pulled the door, and walked out into the gray Virginia morning. Clara stood in the doorway and listened to his horse move down the frozen road until she couldn't hear it anymore. Then she pressed one hand flat against the doorframe, breathed, picked up the deed from the table, folded it, put it inside her dress, next to her ribs, and she went back to work. The papers arrived on Friday. Clara read every word twice. Then she read them a third time, slower, the way Ethan taught her when she was 12 years old, and he sat her down at their father's desk and said, "Don't ever sign something you haven't read all the way to the bottom, Clara. Not ever. Not for anyone." She read it all the way to the bottom. Then she sat back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Because what Jonathan Hale had written into that agreement was not what she expected. She'd expected the standard of it, the protection clause, the property arrangement, the terms of separation should have come to that. She'd braced for something cold, something transactional, the kind of document a man draws up when he's settling an account. What she found instead was a paragraph on page 3 that she had to read 4 times before she believed it. "In all matters pertaining to the household, to personal expenditure, to the education and welfare of Miss Emily Whitfield, and to any business or property held in Miss Clara Whitfield's name, the said Clara Whitfield shall retain sole and final authority. Her judgment in these matters shall not be subject to question, revision, or override." She set the papers down. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. She was not going to cry over a legal document. She was not that kind of woman. She picked up the pen, dipped it, and signed her name. Margaret found out the same afternoon. Clara didn't hide it. She walked into the front room where Margaret was doing her sewing, and she set the signed copy of the agreement on the side table, and she said, "It's done. We marry at the end of the month." Margaret didn't look up from her needle immediately. That was the thing about Margaret. She never reacted fast. She let the silence do the first work. "You changed your mind," she said finally. "I did." "Just like that." "Not just like that." Margaret set the sewing in her lap. Her eyes moved over Clara with that particular expression she'd been wearing since the day she married Clara's father. Assessing, calculating, deciding what was useful and what wasn't. "What changed?" "I read the terms and I found them acceptable." "He gave you something." "He gave me terms." "Clara, Margaret's voice dropped, smoothed out, the way it did when she shifted tactics. I want you to understand that I am not your enemy in this. Clara looked at her. I know exactly what you are, Margaret. Then you know I want what's best for this family. You want what's best for yourself, Clara said, and she kept her voice even because she had long since stopped seeing the point in drama where plain truth would serve. That's fine, I understand it, but we should both be clear about what it is. She picked the papers back up. The marriage goes forward. Emily stays here through the transition. After the wedding, I'll discuss arrangements with Jonathan. Margaret's jaw tightened. Jonathan. You're calling him Jonathan now. He asked me to. My. Something moved through Margaret's expression. Not anger, something meaner than anger. 6 days ago, you called him a transaction. Now he's Jonathan. She picked up her sewing again. Be careful, Clara. Men like that don't marry women like you out of sentiment. Clara stopped at the doorway. She turned back, just enough. No, she agreed. He married me out of loyalty, to a man worth being loyal to. She looked at her stepmother steadily. I'll take that over sentiment every time. She walked out before Margaret could find the next word. The wedding was small. Reverend Marsh, 2 witnesses from the county office, Emily, who cried through the entire thing and kept squeezing Clara's hand so hard Clara's fingers went numb, Jonathan, in a dark coat, standing straight, saying the words in a voice that didn't waver once. Clara said them back. When it was over, Jonathan offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked out into the weak February sunlight, and neither of them said anything for a moment, which was, Clara thought, probably the most honest thing either of them could have done. Then he said, You all right? Yes, she said. You sure? She looked up at him. Are you asking because you're worried or because you want to be polite? Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Both, probably. I'm all right, she said. It's a strange feeling, that's all. What kind of strange? She thought about it honestly. Like I just stepped off a cliff I've been standing on the edge of for a long time, and I don't know yet if I'm falling or if there's ground. He was quiet for a moment. Then, there's ground. She didn't ask him how he knew. She just nodded once, and they kept walking. His house was 3 hours east by wagon, set on a piece of land that had been in the Hale family for 2 generations. A fact Clara knew from county records she'd looked up after she signed the papers, because she was not the kind of woman who walked into a situation blind. Not anymore. Not ever again. What the records hadn't told her was the inside of it. The house was large, and it was cold. Not cold the way a house gets in winter. Cold the way a house gets when it's been lived in by only one person for a very long time. When no one has opened the curtains, or moved the furniture, or left anything out of place. It was the tidiest, most joyless place she had ever stood inside. She stood in the front hall with her single trunk and her leather satchel, and she looked at all of it, and she said, How long have you lived here alone? Jonathan set her trunk down. 4 years. Since the war. A pause. Since before the war. Since my father died. She looked at him. He was looking at the hallway like he was seeing it from the outside for the first time. I can move some things, he said, and his voice was carefully neutral. If you want to change anything, the house is yours as much as mine. That's in the agreement. I know what's in the agreement, she said. I wrote half the notes for it. That stopped him. You negotiated the wording, he said slowly. With my lawyer. I sent him a letter with 17 suggested amendments. He accepted 12 of them. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. He told me the other party had strong opinions, he said. He didn't say who. Did it bother you? He considered that. Seriously, like he considered everything, all the way through, before he answered. No, he said. It didn't. Why not? Because a woman who reads the fine print before she signs is a woman who doesn't complain about the terms later. He picked up her trunk again. That seemed like a reasonable trait in a wife. Clara almost smiled. Where's my room? She said instead. She found the letters 3 days later. She wasn't snooping. She was doing what she did in any new space, learning where things were, how the house functioned, what needed attention, and what had been neglected. The study was a room she'd walked past twice before Jonathan found her standing at the threshold on the third morning, looking at the stacks of correspondence on the desk. That's he started. I know it's your study, she said. I'm not going in. I just noticed the lamp oil's low in here, and the window latch doesn't catch. He came and stood beside her, looked at the desk. I've been meaning to sort through those. How long have you been meaning to? He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. She turned to look at him. Are you in trouble, Jonathan? His jaw set. I'm handling it. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. Something in his eyes shifted, that ironclad composure, cracking just enough, just at the edge, to show her what was underneath. My father left debts, he said finally. I've been settling them. It's taken time. How much time? I'm close. How close? Clara, I have a right to know the state of this household, she said, and her voice wasn't hard about it, just clear. That's in the agreement too. We share the financial picture, good or bad. He stared at her for a beat. Then he walked into the study, pulled out the chair, sat down. Sit, he said. She sat. He spent the next hour showing her everything. She sat beside him at that desk, and she listened to every word, and she looked at every number, and she asked questions, and he answered them. All of them, even the ones that made his voice tighter. And by the end of it, she had the full shape of it in her mind, and it was not as bad as she'd feared, which didn't mean it was good, but it was workable. The timber from the 40 acres, she said. You gave me that deed, but you hadn't sold the timber rights yet. I wasn't going to sell them without your... Sell them! To Miller's Mill, not to Greer. Greer will lowball you by 40%, and he knows it. Miller's honest. She tapped the ledger. That clears this line, and most of this one. The rest you can service over the next 18 months, if you stop paying the Preston account early, and put that money toward the land tax instead. Silence. She looked up. Jonathan was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not quite surprise. Something deeper than surprise. Ethan said you could do this, he said. He said you ran every account your father ever had by the time you were 20. My father had bad head for numbers and a good heart, she said. Someone had to. He also said... Jonathan stopped. What? He picked up a pen, set it down. He said you were the sharpest person he'd ever known, and that the only reason no one else could see it was because you'd gotten so good at making yourself small that people forgot to look. Clara went very still. She looked down at the ledger. Ethan talked too much, she said. He talked about you every chance he got, Jonathan said quietly. Every letter, every campfire, every time someone asked him about home. A pause. He loved you very much. The back of her eyes burned. She did not let it go further than that. Tell me about the Preston account, she said, and her voice only broke on the last word, a little, just a little, and she moved past it fast, and Jonathan let her, which she added to the list of things she was quietly grateful for, without saying so. The trouble came on a Tuesday. It always comes on a Tuesday, Clara would think later. Nobody ever expects Tuesday. She was at the market in Hale's Crossing, the first time she'd gone in since the wedding. The first time anyone in town had seen her as anything other than Ethan Whitfield's poor spinster sister. And she felt it the moment she walked in. That shift in the air. The way conversations didn't stop exactly, but angled themselves differently. The way eyes moved. She kept her chin up. She bought flour and salt and a length of good wool, and she didn't look at anyone sideways. It was Agnes Marsh, the Reverend's wife, who had elevated nosiness to something approaching an art form, who came at her direct. "Mrs. Hale," she said, which at least was correct. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I do my own marketing," Clara said. "Of course you do," Agnes smiled. It was the particular smile of a woman who has something to say and is very much looking forward to saying it. "We've all been talking about the wedding, of course. Such a quiet affair. Some people thought it was, well, rushed." "The arrangements were made quickly," Clara said. "Jonathan has a great deal of work this season." Agnes tilted her head. "Though I did hear, and I'm sure it's nothing, but I did hear that Mr. Hale had been in correspondence with Catherine Alderton. Before the wedding. You know the Aldertons, of course." Clara knew the name. County family. Old money. A daughter of suitable age and background. "I wasn't aware of his correspondence," Clara said evenly. "No, I suppose you wouldn't be. You and Jonathan barely knew each other, did you, before the arrangement?" Agnes's voice stayed sweet. That was the worst of it. How sweet she kept it. Some people wondered whether he might have made a more expected choice if he hadn't felt obligated. Clara looked at her. She took a breath. "Agnes," she said, "I've known you my whole life, and I've always thought you were a woman who could have used her sharpness for something better than watching other people's business. That's not an insult. It's genuine." She picked up her basket. "Jonathan married me. Whatever his other correspondence was, that's what he did. I'd think twice before you spend your days building a story on top of a fact that's already settled." She walked away before Agnes could find her tongue. She got 2 steps past the door before her hands started shaking. She didn't tell Jonathan. She made dinner. She talked about the ledger numbers over supper. She asked him about the north fence he'd been repairing, and she listened to his answer, and she passed him the bread, and she was absolutely, perfectly fine. He watched her through all of it. After supper, he said, "What happened today?" It wasn't a question. She looked up. "Nothing happened." "Clara, I handled it." "I'm not asking if you handled it. I'm asking what happened." She set down her fork, looked at him across the table. This man who had ridden 3 days to keep a promise to her brother. This man who had given her 40 acres and 17 negotiated amendments and an hour at a desk showing her his debts without a single flinch of shame. "Agnes Marsh told me you were corresponding with Catherine Alderton," she said, "before the wedding." Jonathan didn't move. "She implied you settled for me," Clara said, "out of obligation." The silence stretched. Then Jonathan said, "I was introduced to Catherine Alderton at a county dinner 14 months ago. We exchanged 2 letters about a property boundary dispute that affected both our families. That was the extent of it. You don't owe me an explanation." "No," he said, "but you deserve one." His eyes were direct, steady. "I didn't settle for you, Clara. I want that to be clear." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why didn't you marry before?" she said. "You're 34. You have property. You have a name. Why was there no one?" Something flickered behind his eyes. "There was someone," he said. "A long time ago, before the war." She didn't wait. Clara absorbed that. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." His voice was flat, but not unkind. The flatness of something that's been laid to rest, not something still raw. "It was a long time ago. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I don't want there to be things you don't know." "Is there anything else I don't know?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not an easy man to live with," he said finally. "I keep my own counsel. I work too long. I don't talk enough. And when I do, I'm probably too direct." He looked at her. "I'm telling you because you should know what you're working with." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "I've lived with Margaret Whitfield for 7 years," she said. "Believe me, Jonathan, you are not the hardest person I've shared a house with." Something cracked open in his expression. Something she hadn't seen before. Something warm and a little helpless and entirely human. He laughed. It was not a big laugh, just a small, surprised, genuine thing. But it changed his face entirely. Took 10 years off him. Turned him for a moment into a man who was just a man, sitting across a table from a woman, sharing an honest meal. Clara felt something shift in her chest that she had no name for, and was not ready to name. "Go to bed," Jonathan said, when the laugh settled. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You look tired," he said again, and it wasn't dismissive. It was careful. Noticing. The way Ethan used to notice things. "I'll clear the table." "You don't have to, Clara," he looked at her. "Let me do something simple for once." She stopped. She looked at his hands, which were already stacking the plates. Big hands. Work-worn. Steady. She picked up her shawl. "Good night, Jonathan," she said. "Good night," he said, without looking up. She was at the doorway when she heard him say, quiet enough that he might not have meant her to hear it, the same way he'd said, "I made that decision long before your brother ever asked." "Sleep well, Clara." She went upstairs. She lay in the dark, and she pressed both hands flat against her sternum, and she told herself what she felt was gratitude. Just gratitude. A simple, reasonable feeling for a reasonable man doing reasonable things. She told herself that for a long time before she slept. The letter from Margaret came on Saturday. Clara recognized the handwriting before she opened it. She turned it over in her hands once, twice, and then she opened it and read it standing at the kitchen window in the early morning light before Jonathan was up. It was short. Margaret wrote short letters. She'd always found efficiency of cruelty a virtue. "Emily has taken ill. The doctor says it's her lungs. I thought you should know, as you seem to have forgotten you have a sister. Come if you choose. I won't beg." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her pocket, walked to the foot of the stairs, and called Jonathan's name. He was down in 2 minutes, coat already half on, reading her face before she said a word. "What happened?" he said. She held out the letter. He read it. His jaw tightened. "We leave in an hour," he said. She looked at him. "You don't have to come." "I know I don't." He handed the letter back. "An hour, Clara. Pack what you need." She took the letter back. She pressed her lips together, and she went to pack. The road to Hale's Crossing had never felt longer. Clara sat beside Jonathan on the wagon bench and watched the bare trees go past, and kept her hands folded in her lap and didn't say much, which wasn't unusual for her, except that Jonathan noticed the difference between her regular quiet and this quiet, and after about an hour of it he said, without looking over, "She's going to be all right." "You don't know that." "No," he said, But I know you've been running through every worst possibility since we left, and I figured someone ought to say it out loud." Clara looked at her hands. "Emily's always had weak lungs, since she was small. Every winter she gets something, and every winter Margaret says she'll manage, and every winter I'm the one who sits up with her through the fever." She stopped. "I shouldn't have left. You had to live your own life." "She's my sister." "And you're a person," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried, the way his voice always carried. "Those two things can both be true." She didn't answer. He didn't push. They rode the rest of the way in that particular silence that had started to feel, without Clara quite deciding it, like something she trusted. Margaret opened the door before they reached the porch. That was the first wrong thing. Margaret did not open doors. Margaret positioned herself and let doors be opened for her. The fact that she was standing there, coat on, indoors, hands gripped together in front of her, told Clara more than the letter had. "She's worse," Clara said, not a question. "She took a bad turn last night." Margaret's voice had something in it Clara hadn't heard before. Not quite fear, something adjacent. "The doctor came this morning. He said—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "He said to send for family." Clara was through the door before Margaret finished the sentence. Emily was upstairs in the room she'd had since childhood, which still had the faded yellow curtain she'd picked out herself at 12 years old, and refused to let anyone replace. She was smaller than Clara remembered. That was the thing about being away. You came back, and people were different sizes than you'd left them. She was awake. Barely, but awake. "Clara," she breathed. "I'm here." Clara sat on the edge of the bed and took her sister's hand and held it the way she'd held it through a dozen winter fevers, through the bad one when Emily was 9, and Clara had been up 4 nights straight, convincing herself that breathing was a thing that would keep happening if she just kept watching for it. "I'm right here." "You came." "Of course I came." Emily's eyes went past her to the doorway. "Is that Jonathan Hale?" Clara turned. Jonathan had stopped at the threshold, hat in hand, not imposing himself. "Yes," Clara said. "He brought me." Emily looked at him for a moment with those enormous, fever-bright eyes. Then she looked at Clara. "He looks at you the same way Ethan used to talk about you," she murmured. "You're feverish," Clara said. "Don't say things." "I'm sick, not stupid." A ghost of a smile. Then a cough that took too long to stop. And Clara kept hold of her hand through all of it, jaw set, not letting anything show on her face. When it stopped, she said, "Has the doctor left any medicine?" "On the table," Emily said. "Clara, rest. I need to tell you something. It can wait until you're better." "Clara!" Emily's grip tightened, sudden and fierce, more strength than she looked like she had. "It can't wait. It's about the money." Clara went still. "What money?" Emily glanced toward the door. Jonathan had stepped back into the hallway, out of earshot, reading the room the way he always did, giving space when space was what was needed. Clara could hear Margaret somewhere downstairs. "The loan," Emily said, lower. "Father's loan. The one from the bank." She stopped to breathe. "Margaret didn't borrow it. Clara, she didn't take it out. Father signed it before he died, but he signed it to cover a debt that wasn't his." "Whose debt was it?" Emily closed her eyes, opened them. "Alderton." The name landed like a stone in still water. "Richard Alderton," Emily said. "He and Father had a land arrangement. Something went wrong. Alderton threatened, and Father—" Another cough, shorter this time. Father signed to protect Alderton's name. And then Father died, and Margaret didn't know, and by the time she figured it out, Alderton had already... She stopped again. The loan is fraudulent, Clara. The whole thing. And Alderton knows you're married to Jonathan Hale now, and Margaret's been getting letters. From him. Clara sat very still for a long moment. How long have you known this? I found the letters last week, in Margaret's drawer. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for her scissors, and... Emily... I know. Her sister's eyes filled. I should have written sooner. I thought she'd handle it. I thought... It's all right. Clara squeezed her hand, steadied her voice. You rest. I'll handle it. Jonathan, I said I'll handle it. Clara stood. Rest. Drink the medicine on the table. I'll be back in an hour. She walked out of the room and closed the door, and stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, letting herself feel the full weight of what she'd just heard. All of it. The fury and the cold and the something that was almost grief for her father, who had clearly been more desperate than she ever knew. 3 seconds. Then she walked downstairs. Margaret was in the kitchen. Jonathan was by the front room window. He read her face the moment she came down, and he said nothing, just straightened slightly, watching. I need to speak with Margaret, Clara said. Alone? She thought about it. No. She walked into the kitchen. Jonathan followed, 2 steps behind, quiet as a shadow. Margaret was at the table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She looked up when they came in, and something moved through her expression. Calculation, resignation, something that might have been relief, which was the most surprising of the 3. You told her, Margaret said, flat. Not a question. Emily told me, Clara said, which means she figured it out herself and carried it alone while she was getting sick, which is the part that I am choosing not to say much about right now. She pulled out the chair across from Margaret and sat down. Tell me everything. Margaret told her everything. It took 20 minutes. It was worse than Emily knew, which meant it was worse than Clara had braced for. Which was saying something because Clara had braced hard on the way downstairs. Richard Alderton, county family, old money, father of Catherine Alderton, whose name Agnes Marsh had dropped at the market like a hint she'd been saving, had convinced Clara's father to co-sign a land agreement 4 years ago, when her father's mind was already starting to slip and his pride was still too big to admit it. When the arrangement collapsed, Alderton had buried the liability under the loan, transferred the obligation, and let Edmund Whitfield die carrying the weight of it. The bank wasn't coming for Margaret. They were coming for the Whitfield estate. What was left of it? And Richard Alderton had written to Margaret twice in the past month, very politely, suggesting that any legal challenge to the arrangement would be difficult to sustain, and that perhaps a quiet resolution might be found, now that Clara had married so advantageously. He wants money, Clara said. He wants the loan settled and the land agreement buried, Margaret said. He wants it to go away. Because if it doesn't go away, it can be proven. Silence. Clara looked at her stepmother. You have the letters. I have everything. Margaret's voice was stripped of its usual architecture. No sweetness, no calculation, no blade wrapped in silk. Just a tired woman sitting at a table. I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know who to trust. You could have come to me. You were the last person I could come to, Margaret said. And for once, Clara believed her, because it was true. Their whole history had made it true, every year of it. And that was the saddest part of everything. Clara, She stopped. I'm not going to apologize. I know what I am to you. But I need to know. What are you going to do? Clara was quiet. She became aware, without looking, that Jonathan had moved, that he was now standing at her shoulder, not behind her, but beside her, close enough that she could feel the solidity of him. She looked up. He was looking at Margaret with an expression that was entirely controlled and entirely readable. "Where are the letters?" he said. Margaret stood up and walked to the far cabinet, and reached behind the flour tin and pulled out a folded bundle tied with kitchen string. She set it on the table. Jonathan didn't pick it up. He looked at Clara. Clara picked it up. She untied the string. She read the top letter, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, her jaw was set in a way she recognized from the inside. The way it got when she was deciding something, all the way down, all the way to the bottom. She set the letters down. "Richard Alderton has a daughter," she said. "Catherine," Jonathan said. "Agnes Marsh told me at the market that Alderton had been corresponding with you before our wedding." A beat of silence. "He contacted me," Jonathan said, and his voice had gone quieter, which Clara had learned meant it had also gone colder. 3 months ago. He proposed a meeting. He said he had a business arrangement to discuss. I didn't take the meeting." Clara looked at him. "Did you know who he was?" "I knew his name. I didn't know this." His eyes moved to the letters. Something in his jaw tightened. "I knew he was trying to position his daughter in my direction. I thought it was social maneuvering. I didn't know it was." He stopped. "He was trying to get close to you," Clara said. "If you had married Catherine, the debt would have been manageable. Family. Buried. He needed Hale money to make it disappear. And when you married me instead, he shifted targets." She looked at the letters. "He's been pressuring Margaret because he thought she'd pressure me. Because I'm the new Mrs. Hale, and he thinks I'll want to protect the Hale name." Jonathan's voice was very level. "He doesn't know you." "No," Clara said. "He doesn't." She stood up. "I need paper," she said to Margaret, "and a pen. And I need you to go upstairs and sit with Emily." Margaret hesitated. Something in her expression, that unfamiliar, unguarded thing, struggled. "Clara," she said, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything." "Then don't ask," Clara said. Not cruel, just clear. "Go sit with your daughter." Margaret picked up her tea and went upstairs. Clara wrote 2 letters. The first was to the county land office, requesting a full review of the deed transfer associated with the Whitfield estate loan. Grounds being irregularities in the co-signing procedure, specifically the mental capacity of the signatory at the time of signing, and supporting documentation to be furnished upon request. The second was to a solicitor in Richmond, whose name she'd copied from one of Jonathan's ledger contacts, because he was listed as someone who handled land fraud disputes and won them. She signed both letters, Mrs. Clara Hale, and she felt something in the name that she hadn't expected to feel, something that had nothing to do with the letters. Jonathan read them both before she sealed them. He read the first one twice. "The mental capacity argument," he said. "Can you prove it?" "Emily remembers. The doctor who treated my father in his last year is still in Hale's Crossing. He kept records." She met his eyes. "And I remember. I was there. I was there every day." Something shifted in his face. "The solicitor in Richmond," he said. "Harlow. He's good, but he's expensive." "I know." "Clara, I have 40 acres of timber rights," she said. "And we already discussed the Miller's Mill sale. That's enough to retain him and still cover the land tax." Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I have something else." She waited. He reached inside his coat, pulled out a folded document she hadn't seen before, set it on the table between them. She unfolded it. It was a survey. Land survey. Official seal. Dated 3 weeks ago. A parcel south of the Whitfield property, bordering Alderton's eastern fence line. Alderton has been filing claims on land that isn't his, Jonathan said. He's been doing it for 6 years, a little at a time, on parcels that border properties belonging to people who don't check their surveys regularly. He tapped the document. I checked mine because I check everything. And when I saw his name on the border claim, I had my lawyer look into it. What he found... He paused. It's not just your father, Clara. There are 4 other families. He's done this 4 times. Clara stared at the survey. You've had this, she said. 3 weeks. And you didn't... She stopped. Why didn't you tell me? Because 3 weeks ago, you and I had been married for 10 days, and you'd already told me in your own particular way that you didn't want to be managed. His voice was steady, not defensive. I was waiting until I had the full shape of it, until I knew what I had. I was going to tell you. She looked at him. This changes everything, she said. Yes. He can't threaten anyone with that loan if his own land claims fall apart first. No, he can't. He'll lose everything. If it's handled right. Jonathan held her gaze. Which is why I wanted the full picture before I moved. Clara sat back. She thought about Agnes Marsh at the market. Some people wondered whether he might have made a more expected choice. She thought about Catherine Alderton, who had probably known nothing about any of this, and was simply a name used by a man who used people. She thought about her father, signing something he didn't fully understand because he was proud and frightened and running out of road. She thought about Emily upstairs, coughing into a yellow curtain, carrying a secret she shouldn't have had to carry. We take this to Harlow, she said. Together, Jonathan said. Together, she agreed. He extended his hand across the table, the same way he had the day she signed the marriage agreement, that steady, work-worn, undemanding hand. She looked at it. This time, she took it faster. His grip was the same, firm, warm, a beat longer than strictly necessary. There's one more thing, he said, and he didn't let go. She felt it before he said it. That particular weight in his voice that meant what was coming had been held for a while. What? She said. Alderton's going to come at us hard when the land office starts asking questions. He has money, and he has time, and he knows this county. His eyes were direct, level. He's going to try to discredit the Whitfield name. He's going to say your father was unstable. He's going to drag everything through public record if he thinks it'll bury the case. A pause. He's going to come at you. She met his gaze. I know. I need you to know that whatever he does, whatever he says... He stopped, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something in Jonathan Hale's face that was not controlled, not managed, just raw and true and entirely without armor. You are not going through it alone. I want that to be clear. Clara held very still. She thought about the first time he'd knocked on her door, the deed on the edge of the well. You deserve to have something that belongs to you. She thought about the ledger at the desk, the laugh at the kitchen table. Let me do something simple for once. She thought about him stepping back into the hallway upstairs without being asked, because he knew she needed the space, because he already knew her that well. She thought about Ethan, who had trusted this man with his dying breath. Clear, she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he let go of her hand, stood, picked up the survey and the letters. I'll have the wagon ready in an hour, he said. We'll take Emily to the house. She'll recover better somewhere warm." He said it like it was already decided. "Margaret." "I'll deal with Margaret," Clara said. He nodded once and walked toward the door, and paused with his hand on the frame. "Clara?" She looked up. "Ethan was right," he said. "About you." He didn't explain which part. He didn't need to. He walked out. Clara sat at the kitchen table with the letters and the survey spread before her, and she pressed her hands flat on the table, and she breathed, and she let herself feel for exactly one moment the full and terrifying and electric knowledge that she was no longer doing any of this alone. One moment. Then she stood up, gathered the papers, and went upstairs to tell Margaret to pack Emily's things. Emily made the trip without complaint, which told Clara more about how sick she actually was than any amount of coughing would have. Emily complained about everything when she was well. The fact that she sat in the back of the wagon bundled in quilts and didn't say a word for 3 hours meant she didn't have the energy to spare for it. Margaret sat beside her the whole way, with her hand on Emily's arm, and her eyes on the road and her mouth closed, which was its own kind of miracle. Jonathan drove. Clara sat beside him. The sky went from gray to darker gray, and the temperature dropped, and neither of them talked much. But at some point, without either of them deciding it, his shoulder was against hers, and she wasn't leaning away. She told herself it was the cold. She was getting better at lying to herself about certain things. She wasn't sure whether that was progress or the opposite. Emily was in the east bedroom by nightfall, the warmest room in the house, with a proper fire and the medicine the doctor had prescribed, and a cup of broth that Clara made herself from the last of the salt pork, because she needed something to do with her hands. She sat with Emily until her sister's breathing evened out into sleep. Then she stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of the quilt, and she let herself feel it. The fear she hadn't been able to afford in the wagon, the cold grip of it behind her sternum. And then she put it back where it belonged and walked downstairs. Jonathan was at the desk in the study. The survey was spread in front of him, along with 3 of Alderton's letters and what looked like county property records he'd had pulled from somewhere. He didn't look up when she came in, but he said, "How is she?" "Sleeping. The fever broke a little." Clara stopped at the threshold. "What are you looking at?" "The timeline." He pointed at the survey without looking up. Alderton made his first false claim 6 years ago. Small parcel, eastern boundary. Family named Pruitt, who sold and moved west the following year. Nobody looked twice. He moved his finger along the records. Second claim, 4 years ago. Same method. Then your father. Then 2 more. "He's been practicing," Clara said. "He's been refining." Jonathan finally looked up. "He's careful, Clara. Each one is just far enough from the last that no county official would connect them without looking at the full picture." "But you did." "I look at everything." He sat back. "I've been in contact with Harlow. He says we have enough to open a formal challenge, but Alderton will fight it, and he'll fight it loud. He has friends on the county board." "Who?" Jonathan named 2 men. Clara knew both of them. Her father had known them too, had spoken of them at dinner as men of standing, men of good judgment. She was revising that judgment now. "Can Harlow work around them?" "He can, but it takes time, and it takes money. And in the meantime," Jonathan paused. "In the meantime, Alderton knows we've been to the land office. I had word this afternoon." Clara went still. "Already?" "He has someone at the office. Probably has had for years." Jonathan's voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone very cold. "He's going to move fast now, before we can build the case properly." "How fast?" Fast enough that I think you should be ready for something to happen before the end of the week." She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him and looked at the papers spread between them. "What does fast look like?" she said. "Pressure," he said. "Public pressure. He'll start a story, probably that your father was in debt voluntarily, that the loan was taken fairly, that any challenge is a grieving family refusing to accept what their patriarch left behind." His jaw tightened. "It'll play. People believe what's easier to believe. And what do we do about it?" Jonathan looked at her across the desk. "We tell our version first," he said, "and we tell it to someone who matters." The someone who mattered turned out to be Judge Amos Cartwright, who had ridden the Virginia circuit for 30 years and had what Jonathan described, in his particular understated way, as a deep personal distaste for Richard Alderton, going back to a property dispute in 1804 that had never been resolved to anyone's satisfaction. Jonathan sent a letter that night. The reply came the following morning, before breakfast, which told Clara that the judge's distaste for Alderton was even deeper than advertised. She read the reply standing in the kitchen with her first cup of coffee. Jonathan watched her face. "He'll see us Thursday," she said. "I know. I read it." "You could have told me." "I handed it to you 30 seconds ago." She looked up. He was almost smiling. Just at the corner, just barely, that small contained thing that she had started to notice she watched for. "Thursday," she said. "That's 3 days." 3 days to get everything organized. He sat down across from her. "Harlow's sending a clerk with the legal filing documents tomorrow morning. The Pruitt family, the first ones Alderton took from. Their son is still in the county. I'd like you to write to him." "Why me?" "Because you're a Whitfield," Jonathan said simply. "Your father was liked. Your name still means something to the families your father was kind to. Mine means something different. Money. Hale land. The kind of weight that makes some people close up instead of open." He held her gaze. "A letter from Clara Hale, née Whitfield, asking for this man's testimony? He'll say yes." Clara turned her coffee cup in her hands. She thought about what it meant that he'd thought this through, that he'd considered not just the legal mechanics, but the human ones. Who would respond to what? Why? How? She thought about the fact that she'd been prepared to do all of this alone, and the relief of not having to was something she still hadn't fully allowed herself to feel. "All right," she said. "I'll write the letter." She stood, got paper, sat back down at the kitchen table, and wrote it while he drank his coffee. Neither of them needed to talk. That was the thing that kept surprising her. How little they needed to talk, and how much was communicated anyway. Alderton's story broke on Wednesday, 1 day early. Clara was at the market, again because the pantry needed restocking, and she refused to stop living her life around a man's timetable, when she heard it. Not from Agnes Marsh this time. From 3 separate conversations at 3 separate stalls, conducted in the way people conduct conversations they want to be overheard. Edmund Whitfield borrowed against the family estate voluntarily, and his daughters are refusing to honor the debt. The eldest married Hale money specifically to avoid repayment. The bank has been patient, but patience has limits. She heard the first version at the flour merchant, the second at the dry goods. By the time she reached the third, she'd had enough. She set her basket down on the counter, and she turned around and she addressed the room. Not loud, not theatrical. Clara Whitfield had never needed volume. "I'd like to say something," she said, "to anyone who's been hearing a story about my family this week." The market went quiet, the way markets go quiet. Slowly, rustlingly, the way water settles. My father signed a document under pressure, in the last months of his life, when his mind was not what it had been. That document was fraudulent. We are contesting it through proper legal channels with the support of Judge Cartwright's office. She looked around the room, steady, direct. Anyone who has had dealings with Richard Alderton regarding property or land should speak with the county land office, particularly if those dealings felt irregular. Silence. Then old Franklin Pruitt's son. She recognized him from church, square-jawed, quiet, the kind of man who took a long time to say things, but meant them when he did. Said from the back of the room, "I got that letter, Mrs. Hale. I wrote back this morning. I'll be there Thursday." Clara held his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Pruitt." Someone else, a woman, older, in the back, said, "He tried to buy our eastern pasture for half what it was worth. My husband said no. We had a surveyor come out that same week and found a claim already filed on the corner parcel." A third voice, "Which surveyor?" "Alderton's own man." The room changed. Clara picked up her basket. "Thursday," she said, to no one in particular and everyone in general. "County Land Office, 9 in the morning." She walked out before anyone could make her the center of something. She did not run. She kept her shoulders back and her chin up, and she got 3 steps from the door before her heart rate began dropping from somewhere in the vicinity of her throat, back to where it belonged. She was halfway to the wagon when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. It was Catherine Alderton. Clara had seen her at church, but never spoken to her. She was perhaps 20, with a careful, well-practiced composure, and eyes that were doing something more complicated than her expression admitted. She stopped a few feet away, and she looked at Clara, and she said, "Mrs. Hale, I need to speak with you." Clara waited. "What my father did," Catherine stopped, swallowed, started again. "I found out 3 weeks ago. What he did to your family. What he's done to others." Her voice was steady, but it was costing her. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I want you to know that what I know, I will tell, to whoever needs to hear it." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "What do you know?" she said. "I know where he keeps his records, the real ones." Catherine's jaw set. "He keeps a ledger, private, separate from the business books. It has everything. Every claim, every date, every name." She met Clara's eyes. "I can get it." "That would put you in a very difficult position with your father." "I'm already in a difficult position with my father." Something raw moved through the younger woman's expression. "He tried to arrange my marriage to Jonathan Hale, specifically to bury this. I didn't know that at the time. When I found out..." She stopped. "Some things you can't unknow." Clara studied her. She thought about how easy it would be to distrust this. How the obvious reading of it, Alderton's daughter, appearing at the right moment, offering exactly what they needed, had every reason to be a trap. She thought about the look on Catherine Alderton's face, which was not the look of a woman running a trap. It was the look of a woman who had been running something heavier for a much longer time and had made a decision about it. "Thursday," Clara said. 9 in the morning. Bring the ledger." She held the young woman's gaze. "And bring yourself. Your testimony may matter as much as the book." Catherine nodded. Once. Sharp. Like someone making a promise they intend to keep. She walked away. Clara stood for a moment in the road. Then she got in the wagon and drove home and walked straight into the study and said, "Alderton has a second ledger. His daughter is bringing it Thursday." Jonathan looked up from the papers he was reviewing. He was quiet for a long moment. "She came to you," he said. "At the market, yes." "Do you trust her?" Clara sat down. "I trust that she means what she said. Whether the ledger is what she thinks it is..." She paused. I think it is. I think she's been watching her father for a long time, and she's done. Jonathan held her gaze. And if it's a play? If Alderton sent her? Then it's a play, and we deal with that Thursday. Clara folded her hands. But I don't think it is, and I think we take the chance. Jonathan was quiet for another beat. All right, he said. That's all? Just all right? You read her right, he said. I trust your read. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. Something settled in her chest, warm and quiet, and a little frightening. How's Emily? He asked, shifting back to the papers. Better. The fever's been down since this morning. Clara sat back. She asked about you. Jonathan glanced up. About me? She wanted to know if you were always this quiet, or if it was a performance. A beat. I told her it wasn't a performance. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. What did she say? She said she figured that you had the same look Ethan used to get when he was trying to pretend he wasn't paying attention to something. Clara looked at him steadily. She's perceptive, Emily. People underestimate her because she's gentle. People underestimate gentle things generally, Jonathan said. It's one of the stupider things people do. Clara looked at him. He was looking at the papers again, but something in his posture had shifted. Not much. Just the slight ease of a man who has said something true and knows it landed. She thought about what Emily had said. He looks at you the same way Ethan used to talk about you. She had not let herself think about that since the fever room. She was not letting herself think about it now. I'm going to check on Emily, she said, and stood. Clara, she stopped. Margaret came to see me this afternoon, he said, while you were at the market. She turned around slowly. What did she want? She wanted to know what was going to happen to the house, the Whitfield property. He set the pen down. She wanted to know if she and Emily would have somewhere to go. Clara was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her it wasn't mine to answer. He held her gaze. I told her to ask you. She absorbed that. She came to you, Clara said. Not to me. She came to me because she thought it was easier. Something in his voice was very careful, not judging, just honest. I think she's afraid of you, Clara. Not in a bad way, in the way people are afraid of things they don't know how to account for. Clara thought about Margaret's face at the door. That stripped-back, unguarded thing she hadn't known what to do with. I thought you should know, as you seem to have forgotten you have a sister. The cruelty of it, and underneath the cruelty, something much more afraid. I'll talk to her, Clara said, when you're ready. I'm ready now. She moved toward the door and paused. Jonathan, he looked up. Thank you, she said, for sending her to me, not handling it yourself. He held her gaze. It wasn't mine to handle. Some men would have handled it anyway. I'm not some men, he said simply. She looked at him for one moment longer than she needed to. Then she walked out. She found Margaret in the kitchen, which had become, apparently, Margaret's room for sitting in when she didn't know what else to do. She was not making tea or sewing or doing anything useful. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the middle distance. Clara pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Margaret looked up, braced. The house will go to Emily eventually, Clara said. Whatever comes out of Thursday, the Whitfield property reverts to the family once the fraudulent loan is set aside. Emily is the youngest. She'll have it. And me? Clara looked at her stepmother. She thought about 7 years. She thought about, I will put you out of this house before spring. She thought about the hand on her arm, firm and insistent, and the way Margaret had let go when Clara asked her to. She thought about a woman sitting with her hand on a sick girl's arm for 3 hours in the back of a wagon, not saying a word.
"You can stay as long as Emily needs you," Clara said. "After that," she paused. "After that, we'll see what's fair."
It was not warm. It was not forgiveness. Not exactly. Clara wasn't made of the kind of softness that forgave fast and neat and called it growth. But it was true. And it left a door open that Clara could have chosen to close. Margaret's throat moved. "I didn't treat you fairly," she said. Just like that. Plain. Like it had been sitting there waiting to be said. Your father's death left me frightened. And frightened people aren't always... I wasn't always... No, Clara agreed. You weren't. A silence. "I'm not asking for absolution," Margaret said. "Good," Clara said, "because I'm not in the business of giving it on short notice." She stood. "Emily's sleeping. You should eat something." She walked to the door. "Clara." She stopped. "He's a good man," Margaret said. Quiet. "Jonathan. He's a genuinely good man. I didn't expect that." A pause.
"I expected useful. He's more than useful."
Clara stood at the door with her back still to the room. "Yes," she said, "he is." She walked upstairs. She checked on Emily, who was sleeping, whose breathing was even, whose color was better. She stood at the foot of the bed for a moment and let herself feel the relief of that properly. All the way through, not managed, not filed away. Then she went back down. She stopped outside the study door. Jonathan was still at the desk. The lamp was low. He had one hand pressed to his forehead, and he was staring at the papers with the focused, contained exhaustion of a man who would not stop until the thing was done. She knocked once on the open door. He looked up. "Come to bed," she said. "The papers will still be wrong in the morning." He blinked. It was so close to surprised she almost smiled. "I'm not," he started. "Jonathan," she held his gaze. "The meeting is Thursday. You need to sleep. The case doesn't get stronger because you stared at it all night." A long pause. He closed the ledger. He stood. "You're bossy," he said, and there was something in it, low and dry and almost warm, that landed in her chest like a small, well-aimed thing. "I negotiated 17 amendments," she said. "You knew what you were getting." He picked up the lamp. He walked to the door. He stopped beside her, close, the way he was always just close enough that she was entirely aware of where he was without it being anything she could object to. "Clara," he said. She looked up. His face in the low lamplight was... It was the face she'd looked at across a desk, and at a kitchen table, and on a wagon bench in the cold. And she knew it now, she realized. She knew it the way you know a thing you've been studying without admitting you're studying it. "Whatever happens Thursday," he said, "I want you to know. I meant what I said. In the kitchen. Back at your father's house." She knew which words he meant. She'd been not thinking about them for days. "I'm not paying a debt. I'm asking to build something. With you." "I know you did," she said. "I don't want you to forget it. When it gets hard." "I don't forget things," she said. He looked at her for one moment. Just a moment, just long enough. And then he moved past her into the hallway. And she stood in the doorway of the study, with her hand on the frame, and her heart doing something she absolutely refused to name. And she listened to his footsteps going up the stairs. She turned off the lamp on the desk. She followed. Thursday was coming. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara Whitfield, Clara Hale, was not walking toward it alone. Thursday came in cold and clear. the kind of morning that had no patience for hesitation. Clara was dressed before Jonathan. She was at the kitchen table with coffee and the organized stack of documents. Harlow's legal filing, the letters, the survey, her own written account of her father's final months, when she heard him come downstairs. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, took in the sight of her sitting there with everything already ordered, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been up?" "Long enough," she said. "Sit down. There's coffee." He sat. She poured. They went over the documents one final time, not because either of them had forgotten anything, but because going over things together had become, without either of them deciding it, the way they prepared for hard things. Emily appeared at 7, wrapped in a quilt, looking considerably more alive than she had 4 days ago. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the two of them at the table, with the papers between them and the coffee, and the particular quality of silence that had developed around them like a third presence in any room they occupied. And she said, "You're going to win today." Jonathan looked up. "You don't know that." "I know Clara," Emily said. "Same thing." Clara pressed her lips together and looked at her documents. Jonathan looked at his coffee cup, and the corner of his mouth did that thing it did. Harlow met them outside the county land office at 10 minutes to 9. He was a small man, compact and precise, with the kind of eyes that had seen every version of human dishonesty and remained, somehow, specifically outraged by each new one. He shook Jonathan's hand, and then turned to Clara and shook hers with the same firmness and said, "Mrs. Hale, your amendments to the filing were excellent. I used 14 of the 17 in the end." "You told him 15 the first time," Jonathan said. "I added one more after I read it again," Clara said. Harlow looked between them with an expression of professional approval. "The Pruitt boy is inside. 2 other families have sent representatives. And there is a young woman waiting who says she has a private ledger belonging to Richard Alderton." "Catherine Alderton," Clara said. "She's our witness." Harlow absorbed that. His own daughter. Yes. A beat of silence. "Well," he said, "that should simplify certain things considerably." He straightened his coat. "Shall we go in?" Richard Alderton was already in the room. Clara had never seen him up close before. She'd known him by name and reputation, the way you know the shape of a storm by what it leaves behind. In person, he was older than she expected, and heavier, and he had the specific quality of a man who had spent decades being accommodated. His lawyer sat beside him. 2 men from the county board sat behind him. The whole arrangement of him said, "I have done this before, and it has always gone my way." He looked at Clara when she walked in. She held his gaze and sat down. He looked at Jonathan. Jonathan sat down beside Clara and said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. The way he occupied a room said enough. Then Alderton looked at the door behind them, and his face changed. Catherine came in last. She was carrying a flat leather satchel, and she walked to the seat on Clara's other side without looking at her father. And she sat down, and she put the satchel on the table in front of her, and she folded her hands on top of it, and she looked straight ahead. The silence in the room lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Alderton said, very quietly, "Catherine." Catherine did not look at him. "Catherine." His voice was low, the kind of low that had a long history behind it. "What are you doing?" "Sit down, Mr. Alderton," Judge Cartwright said from the head of the table. He was 70 if he was a day, with the bearing of a man who had run out of patience for nonsense sometime around 1795. "We're going to conduct this properly." Harlow presented the case first. He was methodical, and he was devastating. The kind of lawyer who laid things out so plainly that the wrongness of them became inescapable without anyone having to raise their voice about it. The survey discrepancies, the timeline of claims, the pattern across 6 years and 5 families. Edmund Whitfield's medical history, documented by his own doctor, establishing the decline in his capacity in the months before he signed. The fraudulent nature of the loan, which had been originated not to cover any Whitfield debt, but to absorb a loss Alderton himself had incurred and transferred. Alderton's lawyer objected 3 times. Cartwright overruled him twice and told him the third objection was a waste of the room's time. Then Harlow called Clara. She had not expected to be called. She had written her account. She had organized the documents. She had assumed that was her contribution. But Harlow looked at her across the table and said, "Mrs. Hale, you were present in your father's household in his final months. Would you tell the judge what you observed?" She was aware of every eye in the room. She was aware of Jonathan, 1 seat to her left, absolutely still. She put her hands flat on the table. "My father was a proud man," she said. "He built what he had from very little, and he didn't like to ask for help. In his last year, he started losing the thread of things. Conversations, numbers, agreements. He'd sign something and forget he'd signed it. He'd make arrangements and not remember them the next day." She looked at Cartwright directly. He was not the man he had been. Anyone who knew him would have seen it. Anyone who used it saw an opportunity. She did not look at Alderton. She didn't need to. "He trusted people who had good names," she said. "That was always his weakness. He thought a good name meant a good man." A pause. "It doesn't." Cartwright looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Mrs.
Hale." She sat back. Jonathan's hand found hers under the table. Just for a moment. Just a brief, firm, entirely private press of his fingers against hers. Then he let go, and they were both looking straight ahead again, and no one in the room would have known it happened. She let herself breathe. Then Harlow opened the satchel. He placed the ledger on the table. The room shifted. Alderton's lawyer said, "Where did you obtain that?" "It was provided by a witness with first-hand knowledge of its contents," Harlow said. "Catherine Alderton, who is present and available for questioning." He opened the ledger to a marked page. "Judge Cartwright, this is a private record maintained in Mr. Alderton's hand, documenting each land claim filed, the true ownership of the parcel at time of filing, the name of the party displaced, and the amount of financial benefit received by Mr. Alderton in each transaction." The silence was absolute. Then Alderton stood up. "That document was obtained illegally." "Sit down, Mr. Alderton," Cartwright said. "My daughter had no right to—" "Mr. Alderton." Cartwright's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You will sit down, or you will be removed. Those are your 2 options. Choose one." Alderton sat down. His face had gone a color that was not healthy. Cartwright looked at the ledger for a long time. Long enough that the room held its breath. Long enough that Clara became aware of her own heartbeat. Then the judge closed it, set it down, and folded his hands on top of it. "Mr. Harlow," he said, "how many families are documented in this ledger?" Harlow's voice was very controlled. "7, Your Honor." Cartwright closed his eyes for one moment. When he opened them, everything in the room had changed. He ruled within the hour. The Whitfield loan was set aside as fraudulent in its origination. The property was restored to the estate, to be held in trust for Emily Whitfield until her majority. All border claims filed by Alderton against adjacent properties were suspended pending further investigation. The ledger was to be held as evidence.
Richard Alderton was to present himself to the county sheriff's office before end of day. Alderton's lawyer immediately announced an intention to appeal. Cartwright told him he was welcome to try. Then the judge stood, which meant everyone stood, and the room broke into the particular noise of a large thing having just shifted. Clara stood very still in the middle of it. She felt Jonathan move to stand beside her. Not in front of her, not behind. The side. "It's not over," she said quietly, because it wasn't. The appeal was real. The process was long. Alderton had money and time and people who owed him things. "No," Jonathan said. "But the shape of it changed today." "Everything changes today," Harlow said, appearing at her elbow. "The appeal will fail. I'll stake my reputation on it. That ledger is unimpeachable." He looked genuinely satisfied, which, on his reserved face, was something close to jubilant. "Excellently done, Mrs. Hale." "Excellently done yourself," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Clara found Catherine Alderton in the hallway outside. She was standing by the wall with the empty satchel in her hands, and her composure intact, and her eyes doing what they'd been doing since she walked in. That complicated, layered thing that Clara now recognized as someone who had made a choice they knew was right and were bracing for the cost of it. "Thank you," Clara said. Catherine looked at her. "Don't thank me yet. He's going to—" She stopped. "He's going to make things very difficult for a while." "I know." "For both of us," Catherine said. "I'm under no illusion about that." Clara studied her. "Do you have somewhere to go? If you need to leave the house." Something surprised moved through the younger woman's expression. Like she hadn't expected the question. Like she'd braced for a lot of things, and that particular one hadn't been among them. "My mother's sister," she said. "In Richmond. I've already written." "Good." Clara held her gaze. "What you did today took more courage than most people use in a lifetime. I want you to know that I know that." Catherine's throat moved. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, and looked away. And Clara gave her the dignity of not watching her hold herself together. She walked back toward Jonathan. The ride home was different from every other ride they'd made. Not noisier. If anything, it was quieter. But it was the quiet of something settled, something that had been held tense for a long time and had finally been allowed to release. The afternoon had gone pale and cool, and the road was familiar, and Clara sat beside Jonathan on the wagon bench and felt the whole weight of the past weeks move through her like water draining. She was tired. She was so tired that when Jonathan said, "Lean back if you need to," she didn't argue. She didn't lean against him, not exactly. But she let herself stop holding herself quite so upright, and the difference was enough. He didn't say anything about it. She thought about what Emily had said. "He looks at you the same way Ethan used to talk about you." She thought about Jonathan's hand under the table, that brief, private press. Nothing performative about it. Nothing calculated. Just a man telling the woman, in the quietest possible language, "I see you. I'm here." She had spent so long being unseen that she had stopped expecting to be looked for. She thought about the deed on the edge of the well, the 17 amendments, the hour at the ledger, the way he had stood beside her and not in front of her, in every room, every time. She thought about him saying, "I made that decision long before your brother ever asked." She had not let herself ask what that meant. She had carried it for weeks, in the part of herself where she put things she wasn't ready to examine. She thought she might be ready now. "Jonathan," she said. When did you decide?" She kept her eyes ahead. "Before Ethan asked you. When did you decide?" A long silence. The horse kept its pace. The road moved under them. "The market," he said finally. "The horse trade. When you were 17. She turned to look at him. He was still watching the road, but there was something in his jaw, a tension, a carefulness, the look of a man who has decided to say the full truth of something and is doing it without apology. "You stepped between your brother and that man," he said, "and you were so precise, so clear. No anger, no performance, just certainty." He paused. "I'd never seen anyone do that. Take up exactly the space they were owed, and not 1 inch more or less." A beat. I thought about it for a long time. "You didn't speak to me," she said. "You were 17, and I was 26, and I had no business speaking to you." His voice was flat. "So I didn't." "And then?" "And then the war." He was quiet for a moment. "And then Ethan. And then the promise." He finally looked at her. "And when I rode back to Hale's Crossing and knocked on that door, I told myself it was the promise. That it was obligation. That Ethan asked me and I was honoring it." Something shifted in his expression. That rare, unguarded thing. "I wasn't being honest with myself." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You could have said so," she said. "At the beginning." "What would you have done if I had?" She thought about it honestly. "I would have said no faster," she admitted. "I know." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Which is why I didn't." "That's very calculating of you," she said. "I had one chance," he said, "and there was nothing light in it now, nothing dry, just straight truth, looked at directly. I wasn't going to waste it on honesty you weren't ready to hear." Clara turned back to the road. She was quiet for a while. "I'm ready to hear it now," she said. He was quiet too. Then, "I know." And that was all he said. And somehow, it was everything. Emily was on the porch when they got home, wrapped in 2 quilts and looking much more like herself, which meant she was looking at them with an expression of enormous and barely restrained curiosity. "Well?" she said. "It's done," Clara said. "The property's yours, in trust until you're of age." Emily's face went through approximately 6 emotions in 4 seconds. Then she burst into tears, which was very Emily. And Clara climbed down from the wagon and went to her and held her, which was very Clara, and said nothing while Emily cried, because sometimes nothing was what was needed. Over Emily's shoulder, she saw Jonathan take the horse around to the barn without being asked, giving them the moment without comment. And she thought, there it is again, that habit of his, that quiet reading of a room and giving people what they need before they know how to ask for it. She thought she was going to have to stop pretending she didn't see it. Margaret served supper. She didn't announce it. She didn't make anything of it. She just put food on the table and called them all in and sat down herself and poured the water and passed the bread. And if that wasn't the language Clara knew, it was at least one she could begin to learn. They ate. Emily talked about the ruling, about Cartwright's expression when he closed the ledger, about Catherine Alderton, whom she had never met and was already, characteristically, rooting for. Jonathan answered when addressed, and listened when he wasn't, and ate everything on his plate, which Clara had noticed he always did, which was the habit of a man who had learned not to waste things. After supper, Emily went to bed because she was recovering, and Margaret went after her because she was, apparently, practicing at something. And Clara cleared the table, and Jonathan brought the cups in from the sitting room, and they moved around each other in the kitchen the way they had learned to, without collision, without negotiation, with the particular ease of 2 people who who had figured out each other's rhythms without trying to. She was washing up when he said, from behind her, "Clara? Look at me." She turned around. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, a few feet away, and he was looking at her with that expression she had no more pretense of not recognizing. The one that was not controlled, not managed, the one that was just him. "I'm not good at saying things directly," he said. "I think you know that." "You've been fairly direct with me," she said, "about facts, about practical things." He held her gaze. "Not about this." She waited. "I don't want to be your arrangement," he said. "I don't want to be your agreement or your stability or your protection or whatever name we've been using for it." His voice was very steady, very quiet. "I want to be your husband, actually, all the way through." He stopped. If that's not too much to ask." Clara looked at him. She thought about the woman she'd been when he first knocked on her door, wound tight as a watch spring, proud to the point of self-damage, so accustomed to being used that she'd stopped being able to tell the difference between use and care. She thought about who she'd been becoming, quietly, in the weeks since. Not softer, exactly, but expanded, like a room that had been shut up for a long time, with the windows finally opened. She thought about Ethan, who had trusted this man with his last breath and had never once been wrong about people. She crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of Jonathan Hale, and she looked up at him, and she put one hand against his chest and felt his heartbeat, which was not as steady as his face, and that, more than anything, was what decided her. "You're not asking too much," she said. His hand came up to cover hers, held it there. "I'm not easy," she said. "I want you to know that going in. I read everything. I negotiate everything. I will never pretend to agree when I don't." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." "I don't forgive quickly." "No, but you're fair." His thumb moved over her knuckles. "That's better than fast." She looked at him. "Jonathan." "Clara." "Stop talking," she said. And for once in his careful, deliberate, precisely measured life, Jonathan Hale did exactly as he was told. Spring came to Hale's Crossing the way it always did, without asking permission, pushing up through frozen ground with a stubbornness that had no patience for the cold's opinion of the matter. Alderton's appeal failed in April. Harlow sent a letter that was 3 sentences long and contained the words "as anticipated" in a tone that Clara suspected was as close to gloating as Harlow ever got. The 7 families documented in the ledger each received formal restoration of their land claims. Catherine Alderton's testimony, given in writing from her aunt's house in Richmond, was cited 3 times in the final ruling. Richard Alderton was assessed a sum that would take him a very long time to recover from, if he ever did. The Whitfield property was transferred cleanly into Emily's trust. Emily was already talking about what she wanted to do with the East Field. Margaret was still in the house. She had planted a kitchen garden in February, which was aggressive and probably premature, and had, to everyone's mild surprise, mostly survived. She and Clara had not had another conversation like the one in the kitchen. They had instead had approximately 40 smaller conversations, none of them easy and none of them dishonest, and that was progress enough for now. On a morning in late April, Clara stood at the study window in the Hale house, her house. She was still practicing that word, still learning to let it land, and she watched Jonathan ride out to check the north fence, which always needed checking after winter. And she thought about the woman who had stood barefoot in a cold room 6 months ago and refused to be saved. She hadn't been wrong to refuse it. She just hadn't known, yet, the difference between being saved and being seen. There was a world of difference between the two. Jonathan looked back once before he cleared the tree line. He couldn't have known she was at the window. Maybe he was just looking back at the house. Maybe it was habit. She raised her hand anyway. He raised his. Then he was gone into the morning, and she turned back to the desk and the ledger she was reviewing, and the cup of coffee that was almost too cold to drink, and the life she had built, amendment by amendment, choice by careful choice, out of the rubble of everything she had been handed and refused to simply inherit. Clara Whitfield had never been invisible. She had only been waiting for a world brave enough to look, and for herself to finally stop stepping out of the light.